Onto a race that perhaps has more intrigue exiting it than it did even going into it. The Grade 1 Awesome Again Saturday at Santa Anita had two horses that figure to be prominent players in the Breeders' Cup Classic. One of them the likely favorite in Accelerate for John Sadler, the other West Coast coming off of a long layoff for Bob Baffert. The field of six, really the other four, kind of, no disrespect, but this was about two horses. First things first, let's take a look at the stretch run of this year's Awesome Again.
The Lieutenant Prime Attraction, 3/16 left to go. It's Accelerate with West Coast dogged on the inside. Isotherm between them running a bold race. West Coast and Accelerate, a riveting renewal of the Awesome Again. Accelerate on the outside with his head in front close to home. West Coast running out of puff has given a good account of himself, but Accelerate keeps powering on. Accelerate 2.5 lengths coming away to beat West.
Accelerate prevails at odds of 1-5 over West Coast, who off of the long layoff runs well enough, beaten 2.25 lengths, and Isotherm runs third at odds of 57-1, the longest shot on the board. Let's take a look at the winner, Accelerate. 9 of 21 lifetime, 10 times second or third, just under $2.5 million in career earnings, owned by Ronus Racing LLC, trained by John Sadler, bred by Mike Abraham in Kentucky. Ridden victory by Joel Rosario, and you see at the bottom of the horse card, he is by Looking at Lucky out of an Awesome Again mare named Issues. Oddly enough, we have a little bit of a family connection with the race. From a numbers standpoint, this is where things really sort of, I don't want to say go sideways, but get interesting. Where you can look at this race, and this is going to be one of the more important races that you as a handicapper need to make a call on come Breeders' Cup Saturday. Accelerate earns a 100 Beyer speed figure and a 122 time form US rating. Just for perspective's sake, Accelerate in his race prior, the Pacific Classic, earned a 137 time form US rating and a 115 Beyer speed figure. This is a significantly slower effort for a horse like Accelerate. And by the way, if we're just using sort of statistical points as frame of reference, this is the slowest race Accelerate has run since 7 starts back, when he earned an 84, which off the top of my head, that might actually be last year's Breeders' Cup. This is an instance where you're going to really need to sit back and make a decision as a handicapper and say, what am I making of this? West Coast earned a 97 Beyer and a 124 time form US rating. The time form US rating for him was higher because he was up there on the pace, and time form US had the half, the 3/4, and the mile call, all color-coded red. They staggered home in this race. Accelerate came home in 13:68, West Coast 13:96, Isotherm 14:06. Those are final eighths. If they had to go an extra eighth of a mile, they're going to be in the 27-second range. Some of them maybe even 28 seconds or slower. This track at Santa Anita, the main track, you've heard people out there, I heard people this weekend discussing that it seems to be much deeper. It's deeper in the mornings, deeper in the afternoons. The final clocking would suggest that as well. They stopped the clock at 50-1. These are top-level Grade 1 horses. But the question now becomes, going into the Breeders' Cup, is this the kind of effort you want to take a short price on? Because Accelerate is probably going to be the favorite. And not only was it because the clock and the final time and these speed figures have come back on the slow side, Accelerate did some things that I didn't love on Saturday, to be frank. Reluctant to load into the gate, threw a little bit of a fit in the gate. When he first broke out of the gate, hanging on his left lead down the front side, he's very professional. And he carried a lot of ground in here, and he carried the high weight of 125, and he had a lot of things going against him. I'm not saying he ran poorly. I'm just suggesting if you're looking at him as a, let's just throw a number out there, as a 3-1 sort of price for the Breeders' Cup Classic at 10 furlongs in Kentucky off of this effort, is this really what you're looking for? That's up for you to decide. I thought West Coast ran fine considering this was his first start since March. Probably needed one. The fact that he boxed on the way that he did, I thought that was impressive. But at the same time, and we had heard different things. With Baffert, you hear 80%, we got to get a good race into him, good hard race, so he's ready to go for the Classic. Well, how often does Baffert bring a horse back short? It seems unlikely. And the fact that he ran as well as he did, you could certainly make the case that he will take a step forward here in his second start off of the long layoff. But there's also something that you need to consider going forward with all the Baffert horses, and Baffert has said it. there's a little bit of a virus going around his barn. Forced a number of scratches on Saturday, likely to force some scratches coming up this upcoming week. You need to hope now that the big horses, and we'll talk about the big Baffert horses that she laid a giant egg on Sunday. You got to start wondering, are they all going to stay healthy leading into the Classic or the Breeders' Cup in general? Or are they going to come down with a little bit of an illness? And if they do, say goodnight, Irene. Very unlikely that you're going to win the biggest race of your career. I think Mike Watchmaker, and I only read bits and pieces of the column, so maybe this, and you know what? I don't even want to put words in someone else's mouth. But I thought he at least brought up an interesting fact that Isotherm being as close as he was, a horse that he's Isotherm. He's a nice horse, but he's not nobody's looking at him saying Breeders' Cup Classic. He was only half length behind West Coast, and he was only about 2 3/4 behind the winner, Accelerate. You're going to need the top two to run a hell of a lot better to be legitimate players in the Breeders' Cup Classic. If you told me that this is what we're going to be dealing with two horses that are probably going to be two of the top 4 choices, right now, I would have to be looking at it saying, from a gambling standpoint, that's not going to cut it. I think there's still 2 of the more likely win contenders, but boy, from an individual race standpoint, that's just a very, very tough pill to swallow. I know a lot of people are anti the whole bounce theory, but I could make that argument for Accelerate, considering his effort in the Pacific Classic was just massive. And maybe he needed one. Maybe this was his sort of coming down to reality, and now we're going to come back to what he actually is, that sort of mid-1 kind of horse. If he gets close to that Pacific Classic for the Breeders' Cup Classic, he is going to be a very, very tough cookie. If he runs this, he might not hit the board. It's going to be a very, very interesting race to go forward, dissect. Let's hope everyone comes out of it in good order. Let's hope they all train well leading into the Breeders' Cup. And let's hope we get a serious showdown. You had a little bit of a crazy result at Belmont Park with the Jockey Club. Got a little bit of an odd result. Maybe not an odd result. The result ended up being formful, but odd performances from Accelerate and West Coast. We'll talk shortly about a horse from Churchill Downs that might be a little bit interesting, but all of a sudden, and I was one of the first people to say it, a few weeks ago I said this Classic division looks kind of straightforward. There's only 2 or 3 horses. Now, maybe you have the opportunity as a handicapper to get a little bit creative. Accelerate prevails. May not have been his most impressive performance, but he prevails in the Grade 1 Awesome again. A 100 buyer and a 122 time form US rating. It'll be interesting to see. If this version shows up in the Breeders' Cup, he's going to have his work cut out for him. If we get the Pacific Classic version, he's a major contender. We'll find out and see what we get.